Edu-Magicians, welcome to the Edu-Magic Podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fesich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of Edu-Magic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Kathy from the Kindergarten Kiosk Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now.
Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect those of others.
Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Edu-Magic Podcast. Today, I am joined with Dan Kreiness, who is the podcast host of the Leader of Learning podcast. And we met on Twitter or Instagram, some sort of social media, and he's always an inspiration for teachers and future teachers around the world and across the country. So, Dan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. And I think you might have missed the part where you were also a guest on the Leader of Learning podcast. That's not how we met, but you two are inspiration, and I really enjoyed when you were a guest and all the things that you had to say and the things that you do about working with and inspiring those pre-service teachers. So thank you for all that you do.
Awesome. Thanks so much. That was so nice. It was a good time. I really enjoyed that episode. Now, I know that you've had lots of different roles in education. And would you be able to share a little bit about your journey in teaching? So what's your teaching story? What's the story behind what got you interested in teaching or just thinking about the teaching career? And where has your trajectory led you from where you started off to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks. And I'll try to make it just a little bit, I'll abridge it. So I think really for me, teaching was always something that I wanted to do, as early as I can remember when people would ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? That's what it was. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to work with kids. And I think a lot of that had to do with my experiences as a child growing up at summer camp and like even Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, which I wasn't really in for very long, but just other opportunities that I experienced in terms of how adults, teachers, people who were like teachers, had that ability to inspire young kids. And so that's really what I wanted to do. I initially went to college actually as a music education major, but I ended up coming out with a degree in journalism. Lots of reasons why, I guess, but I kind of realized after dabbling in the broadcast journalism industry for a little bit, it just really wasn't a career move that I felt like I was going to stick with. It was long hours and odd hours and working nights and weekends. And I was about to get married. I was like, you know what? This isn't for me. I need to get back into the teaching thing. So let's see. It was 2005. I got married. And a couple months later, I was back in school to get my master's degree. And I had a job as I think we called it back then a teacher's aide. They sort of call them like paraprofessionals now, and they have all different titles. But that's actually how I got started in education. And the very next year, I got my own classroom and became a teacher for the first time in the Bronx in New York and New York City schools. And it was quite a culture shock, as it is many times when people start teaching, but I was actually thrown into the classroom with absolutely no student teaching. And I feel like this is important to mention on a podcast like yours and with as much work as you do with pre-service teachers. I never really was a pre-service teacher. I suppose you can consider my quote unquote pre-service time in education as my first year of teaching. And so it was really trial by fire. I don't even know that I picked it up very quickly or easily, and how many of us really do. But, I navigated my way through the first year or two. And honestly, after like 3 or 4 years of being a classroom teacher, that's when I started to get the itch to kind of move beyond the classroom and instead of just working with students, really work with and inspire the adult learners in the building.
So you mentioned you went from music education, journalism, and then back to education. And you mentioned the importance of having those teacher mentors or the people who invested in you as a child and as a student, and that kind of encouraged you to become a teacher. I think a lot of listeners can relate to that, where they've had an influential teacher and an influential adult in their life speak into their life and hopefully, inspire their career. Now, your first year teaching, I guess we will call that your pre-service teacher year. That must have been an incredibly challenging, humbling, inspiring year. What are some strategies that you used to I know we all have to get through our first year, but what are some strategies that you use to keep that motivation up and that encouragement that you can do this and that you were meant to be an educator?
That's a really great question. And I remember actually I was in a really large school, and we did have a building principal, but really the assistant principals at the school were, because they worked with each grade band. So I was in a K-8 school, and we had an assistant principal for K-2, 3-5, and 6-8. So I worked at the middle school level, and my assistant principal in that 6-8 grade band was really like my direct supervisor, I didn't really go to the principal. I remember going to the assistant principal and, really just telling her, like, I think I'm struggling. I don't know how I'm going to get better. I don't know how I'm going to make it through my first year of teaching. Like, I don't know if I don't know if I ever said like, this isn't for me, but she understood. And so when I went to my assistant principal and I told her all that, basically her advice to me was like, well, you are in your first year of teaching. And basically, if you're not going home and crying every other day or a couple times a week, you're probably doing something wrong. And I was like, first of all, I don't cry. Second of all, is that really... And she was a great, I really looked up to her and respected her as an assistant principal. She ultimately became and still is the principal at that school. But I didn't think that was the advice that I was really looking for. So I did kind of have to take matters into my own hands in terms of bettering myself. There were a couple of things that happened to me that year that made a big impact. One was that there was I guess his title was a literacy coach. There was a literacy coach hired at the school, and so much of his focus was actually on me, even though there were lots of other teachers that he needed to be working with. He spent a lot of time in my room and coaching me and helping me. And I think that's because everybody saw the potential in me, and they didn't want to see me peter out and give up or whatever may have happened. So he gave me a lot of advice along the way. The one that I remember the most that he kept talking about was in terms of my classroom and my classroom management. He would always say, avoid the void. In other words, do your best to plan every second or every minute of your lesson so that there are no opportunities for it to really break down. And then, whatever might happen, the kids get wild or you kind of lose control, and that helped a lot. But I think ultimately, and I know it's maybe a little cliche to say, ultimately it was the moment I started really concentrating on building relationships with my students. And what made that very difficult was in New York City schools, when I began teaching as an ELA teacher, our state English assessment in grades 3-8 was in January. And so we only had September, October, November, December really to prepare our students for the state test. And it was difficult, to say the least, to be able to fit in opportunities for that relationship building. But I did feel like once the test was over, that second half of the year, the pressure was off, and I intentionally built in opportunities for that relationship building. And then I believe wholeheartedly that everything changed from there.
It really, I like how you said it kind of sounds cliche, but it really is true. Getting to know your students really does do a world of difference in your teaching and in your classroom environment. I feel like that's always like the default answer for college courses, when you're asking, how are you going to plan a lesson? You got to get to know your students and see how they learn best, plan a lesson that best fits their needs and their strengths.
When I say that I did things intentionally to build relationships, I mean, I would even seek out kids on the schoolyard during lunchtime, during recess, and, sit with them or play with them if they were involved in some kind of sport. We didn't really have competitive sports too much in the school, but we would do like after school intramurals. And I didn't really run the intramurals, but I would stay and either watch, a basketball intramural, or I got involved in playing when they were doing softball intramurals. And I knew that those were going to be, like I said, intentional ways to build those relationships. And again, as cliche as it may or may not be, I really felt I felt more in control in the classroom. I felt more confident as a teacher, and I just knew that those opportunities were what was making a difference for me.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think a lot of our pre-service teachers who are student teaching or maybe in field work can still go and do those opportunities. They don't have to be a first-year teacher. They can still go and watch a play or go to the musical or whatever it might be. Students notice, and they do know that you're there.
I think the combination of the fact, just to bring in another element of how things really began to turn around for me and inspire me to stick with it and become better as an educator, was, I think, that combination of building relationships with students and also learning from and learning with my teaching colleagues as well, and seeking out human resources around me and in my building, and not being so closed off in my own classroom, and branching out and reaching out and learning from the other teachers who are around me too. I think that's also important. And if you can strike that balance, as hard as it might be, and as much as you may, you might go home as a first, second, maybe third year teacher crying. And I'm not saying that's okay. And I'm not going to say what my assistant principal way back in the day said, like, you should be doing that, but it's okay. And just know that between building those relationships and intentionally seeking opportunities to do so, and then really branching out and utilizing the people around you, then I think you'll find that you'll be much more comfortable.
I agree. And I think another way to branch out is by taking a lead in your own learning. And since you're the host of the Leader of Learning podcast, what are some ways that pre-service teachers, student teachers, future educators can kind of take a stand in being a leader of their own learning trajectory? Yes, we get the courses and they get the assignments and things like that, but what are some ways that they can step out of the college classroom and kind of own their own learning and professional development?
First, before I answer that, or I guess it's part of my answer, I want to recommend a book. And I think, and I haven't read it, to be honest with you, but it's a good friend of mine, and I trust him, and I trust the words that he has written in his book. It is an EduMatch book. It's called Lead from Day One by a pretty good friend of mine, Ryan McHale, who is a fellow podcaster, a fellow ASCD emerging leader. And the book is about literally how can teachers lead from day one. So, as new teachers, as pre-service teachers, what are the steps that they can already start to take to, realize and actualize their own educational leadership? I think my advice would be, and I already kind of mentioned, like, reaching out and branching out and utilizing the people that are around you. I think one of the best ways to do that is whether you're a student teacher or a first year or second year teacher. Heck, I'm actually doing this with the teachers that I support in my building, who some of them have been teaching like 20, 30 years. Get out there and watch how other people do things. I never really had, like I said, I never really got that student teaching experience. But one of the biggest things that I've learned throughout my career, especially in opportunities like the one that I have now as an instructional coach, to go into other classrooms and watch how teachers do things, it's amazing how much you can learn from just watching other people. And I know that sometimes teachers get uncomfortable with other adults in their room. Like they could teach in front of, 50, 100, however many kids, you could put however many students you want in a class. Teacher is totally comfortable. You put like a couple adults in there, they're like, whoa, wait a second. And I get that. I get that because a lot of times when adults are in your room, they are evaluating or at the very least judging what you're doing. But if you can just do it so that you're getting ideas and you're getting inspiration for what you may or may not bring back with you into your own classroom, that really goes a long way. And I know that might not seem like a leadership move, but I think it is. And I think because you are using that as an opportunity to model how people can learn from and learn with each other and collaborate with each other, I think that goes such a long way.
It reminds me of that pineapple chart where someone hangs a pineapple chart outside their door. Come and observe me. I want feedback on or whatever they're looking for. Yeah, I think that's an incredible way to learn. Get out of your comfort zone a little bit for both the person observing and the person who's being observed. And it's a nice way to give feedback peer-to-peer and to learn something new. Yeah,
and as a matter of fact, I spoke not too long ago on my podcast to Robert Kaplinski, who created the hashtag Observe Me movement. And I think pineapple charts, although they're a little bit different, they kind of go hand in hand. And it was great to be able to talk to him. And that's something that I've really wrapped my head around over the last several years, is helping teachers feel comfortable visiting other teachers and letting other teachers visit them and having it be super informal, but super empowering too, to be able to learn from each other. And the way that I pitch it to the teachers that I work with now is look, I have the luxury, I'm so fortunate to be able to go into all of your classrooms and see the great things that you're doing. But I know that you don't really have that time as a classroom teacher because you're teaching 4 periods or 5 periods a day. And I just really want you to take that time to see the incredible things that each other are doing, because I know that you can learn so much from it.
I love that. I'll have to link to that episode in the show notes, along with Ryan's book, Lead from Day One. Yes, shout out to another EduMatch author. Whoop, whoop. Yeah. So, Dan, can you finish us up with some best advice, either for future educators, those who are maybe starting their student teaching, or maybe they just graduated in December, or the new teacher who just started their first classroom this year? What's some best advice that you have for that part of our audience today?
Honestly, I think it starts with getting to know yourself as an adult learner. You could talk all you want about learning styles, and I know there's been a lot of research out there that have said in terms of students and our instruction that maybe learning styles don't really exist. But we all know at the end of the day that there are ways in which we learn best. And so I guess my point here is find how you learn best. And I hope that includes and involves you visiting and watching how other teachers do things. But it may also involve, really getting connected as an educator, like on social media. I know for me, it really opened my world and propelled my career in so many different ways, in so many different directions, when I just started getting connected on social media, attending and speaking at different conferences. And actually that started with going to ed camps too, which are like those mini conferences that are totally free and I mean totally run by the people who are attending the conference. So literally, if you show up to an ed camp and there's anything that you have an interest in or a passion for learning, you can. And so I think taking opportunities like that are some fairly non-traditional, although they've probably been more mainstreamed over the past couple of years. Those are some more non-traditional ways. Of course, there are so many people like yourself who are writing books, great books about, every topic under the sun that you could think of in education. So, pick up a book, listen to a podcast. That's a very non-traditional way of getting that personalized PD, bettering yourself as a teacher, bettering yourself as a leader and a learner. So yeah, there's so many ways, and there's just so much advice that I would give to people in terms of how to really continue to excel and grow. So, some of the ones I mentioned, ed camps, conferences, podcasts, if you're into the more non-traditional, and then if you're a traditional, pick up a book and really understand how you learn best and understand what you want to learn best, and you'll find something out there.
I think that's perfect. I love how you give a variety of ways that people can reach out and build themselves up as the professional that they are in a way that best suits them. So maybe it's going to an ed camp, reading a book, listening to an awesome podcast, reading an Edutopia article or something like that. And there are so many different ways that you can approach professional development in a way that's going to help you grow. That's awesome. Thank you. All right. So how can my audience connect with you after the show?
I think the easiest way is the website, leaderoflearning.com. That's where you can find all of my contact information and, of course, information about the Leader of Learning podcast. I'm everywhere on social media at D Kreiness, Kreiness.
Awesome. And can you share a little bit about your podcast?
Yeah, thanks. The Leader of Learning podcast is where educators can come find inspiration to help transform education through effective leadership. Sounds like I'm reading a script, but I just have it all memorized. That's my mission. And basically what that means is I like to talk about and inspire this understanding of how educational leadership can be practiced by anyone, regardless of their role in education and regardless of the title that they may have in their school or in their district.
I think that's a beautiful mission. And friends, if you're looking for another podcast to subscribe to, make sure you smash that subscribe button for the Leader of Learning podcast. Dan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Sam. I really appreciated the conversation. Thanks.
There you have it, EduMagicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more EduMagic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram at sfessage. Until next time, you have the EduMagic within you.